Grant, without any further ado, I call on the Prime Minister to open the case that stands in their name.
All right. So the problem we have in today's society is in developing countries, there is usually a very negative sentiment toward the situation that is in the country and a very negative sentiment towards the state of itself. What we believe that we achieve when we allow prominent individuals and why prominent individuals should emphasize the positive aspects of their country is two main stakeholders that they impact when they speak prominently about, when they speak positively about their country. Firstly, it is the investors that we'd like to talk about. So the investors usually do respect other investors or other people of influence more than they would respect some general sentiment or some general information about this country or about the aspects of this country. If a person who is a prominent investor, if Jeff Bezos, I know he's not a developing country, but as an example, tells you, well, this is probably a good investment, this is a good situation, this is something that is being done good in this country, you are more likely to perceive that this is correct. Of course, we acknowledge that these individuals are not bringing new information that these people are not aware of. They're telling them something completely new, but they are bringing a positive sentiment to it. Therefore, they can create value out of just the fact that they're giving you a positive sentiment. If a famous celebrity tells you, oh, this beach is great, you should probably go here, she does not change the fact about this beach, but people are more likely to go there because this person has enough influence and enough prominence to create actual value just from saying something has value. This is why we believe these investors would be more likely to invest in aspects of this country that these individuals are advertising. We believe that they have some value, and they have some, and B, they can value by saying something has value. The second and larger stakeholder we believe this effect is the population. So there is in populations in developing countries very negative impact and very negative perception of, because of many issues. They often have governments that are constantly changing and rapidly changing. Sometimes it's one party, sometimes it's the other party, and there is a negative sentiment towards both in many times. So when you look at, for instance, these governments, they're not something that is constant. They're not a sure force. If you want to invest in somebody, in the aspects of the investors that we talked about, you can't be sure which government is going to be in power in 4 years and 8 years and 12 years. You can't have a long-term plan. These prominent individuals are here to stay. If you're trying to go into business with a prominent individual as a business leader or something, they're likely to be here in some years' time. They're likely to endorse this. And if you're going to say invest in something that is that they're endorsing, you can be sure that it's at least a bit more concrete. But moving on from the investors on this point, the population and their perception. So firstly, we'd also like to note that we are not expecting these individuals to lie about the situation that is there. We would like them to emphasize the positives. And we do agree that this impact is often marginal and not going to be something revolutionary, but even a marginal impact, it is a positive impact. In this negative situation, negative perception, this is a bit of a light in this sea of negative impact. So people might be at least more positively changed towards their perception. In these developing countries, you often have the media showing you that everything is safe. You have the media from both sides of government, usually talking bad things about the other side. You have people in their free time, they're talking about, oh, how bad the situation is. If somebody, a prominent person that actually has some sway over the population, that the population is likely to trust and likely to be influenced by, telling you, oh, this is something that's good. Even if they're showcasing a negative situation, oh, you see this bad situation, this is how I think you should fix it. This is how I would fix it. This is what I'm going to do towards this. This is the positives that can come out of this. You might, some people at least might, be persuaded to change their opinion. So we also believe that prominent people like this can influence at least public discussion. Even if you do not agree with the sentiment that they're telling you, they can call to public discussion. If you have some big celebrity and they're telling you, oh, this is a bad situation that's happened in our country. This is what I believe about it. Even if you disagree, you can be called upon to share your opinion and why you disagree. You can make public forums. You can go on whatever your country's version of Ellen is and tell you, oh, this is what I believe is very bad or very good. And then Ellen says, well, this dude thinks you're bad. And then they call him up and he explains why they think this is. This can call to public discussion that's actually productive. Because, well, what these people are, they're essentially part of the population, but they're the people that you are likely to be influenced about. That are likely to influence you. These are the people that you're likely to at least take their opinion to a higher standard because they are who they say they are. And if this opinion is positive, that can generate at least some positive impact from this situation. So what we believe, if the opposition will try to claim, oh, well, everything, well, they're lying about your country, they're giving you false hope. We believe that they're not giving you false hope. They're giving you what they believe is correct. They're giving you the positive aspects of a problem because most problems have at least some positive aspects, and they would like you to focus on them. A positive aspect would be how to solve this problem, or what good can come out of this problem. If you're talking about the coronavirus situation, you can talk about, well, how I think it'll turn out, what I think we can do to make sure that once the apocalypse is over, we can try to fix part of the situation, or what we can do to make this transition easier for us. They are focusing on a positive part of even a problem, such as you have, for example, team trees in America, even though I know America is not a third world country, but or a developed country, whatever. But we believe that once you're focusing on trees, they think, oh, the pollution is bad, but look, we're planting trees. $1 plant a tree is going to be great. You're at least joining people together in a more positive sentiment, a sentiment that is likely to bring about positive outcomes for A, the country, and B, the economy, at least in a marginal part, and C, most importantly, for the perception of the people and how they perceive their situation. Because if they're more happy, they're more likely to at least change their situation a bit. And even if it is a marginal impact or a small impact, at least a positive perception is a benefit that OG is proud to stand behind, because the people are likely to at least be happier about the situation they're in, even if we can't change the situation. This is why we're proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for their kind words and call on leader of.
Yes, I'm here. So yes, we know that each country in this world has its own negative aspects and its own positive aspects. So yes, each country has these problems or these obstacles, and maybe no one in this world know about these aspects. So what if no one still does not know anything about this? So no one will help them. So we stand for that we have to solve these problems together. We have to share these problems or these obstacles together. So these investors, if let me say that they share the obstacles that they face, or they share the problems on maybe in international platforms. So let me say that, of course, many people will help them, will tell them what they should do. So in this case, of course, they will solve these problems and they will not face them anymore. So let me say that we have like business problems, we have cultural problems, we have health problems. So we need to solve these problems. So even those outside politics, we know that population or people in the country believe what those people say, and they think that they are together, especially those people who are outside the politics, outside politics. So once they talk internationally, once they share their problems, of course they will find the suitable solutions for these problems. So let we say, or let we take the first, which is business, or which is economy, people. We can say if we face an financial problem these days. So what will happen if we didn't share this problem? No one will know. No one will help us. No one will even talk with us to solve this problem. But what if this businessman or talk with others on this international platform? So of course they will find these suitable solutions, and people will help them. And the second aspect, which is health aspect. So let we say that we are here in Gaza. We don't have maybe the suitable number of hospitals, let me say, but what if we share this problem? What if we share it with others? So of course they will help us to find the solution, and we will maybe we didn't know about this solution before, so they will help us. But if we just say that yes, we have just suitable number of hospitals or suitable numbers of health centers, so yes, it's okay. But if we say that we have these problems, of course they will help us. The last aspect, which is cultural aspect, we say that we don't know how to let people know about our culture or about our civilization. So once we let other know about this, of course they will we will have more positive impacts and more solutions. So we will share this civilization with other people around the world, and of course we will find the solutions. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I thank the speaker for their kind word, and I call on Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay, so first, we believe that the characterization of the opposition is not quite right, telling that the whole world is completely oblivious to the fact what's happening wrong in these countries is not true, because that's like the part of the why investments are not happening right now, why the other countries and the other companies do not have trust in these countries, because they all are aware of the situation in this country. They're aware of the situation that is happening with their politics and with their economy and with their low developing state they're in right now. And that's like the whole premise why we needed this positive impact, because, and that's like the whole premise of our first point when we talk about impact of these international investments and getting other companies and other people outside of the country aware of the positive aspects that these countries can have. So what we believe that in status quo is happening right now, first of all, these investors, they do not care about helping people in this country, because that's not how capitalism works. Because these people only care about the profit. And once you see unstable state where you cannot be sure if the politics will be stable in further years, if this is what makes this investment for them to be so unsure, and that's why they do not want to take risks, and they do not don't want to invest in those countries. And also, when we talk about these positive aspects, and when we're trying to appeal all investors, we can finally give them some kind of information they can hold on to, and then that can ensure them and make them invest in those countries. And once they invest in those countries, that's what stimulates the economy of these countries. That's what stimulates the development of these countries, because more money is circulating in these countries and more money is being spent on these countries. And that's what guarantees in the end development. So even though these countries are developed, and even though these people right now are and those investors aren't sure, once you get the investors in those countries, that actually brings a greater healthcare and the education and all of the stuff that developing countries have on a high level, but these do not. I believe the opposition believes that some kind of savior will come them and rescue them from their misery, but that's not actually what happens, and that is not efficient. And what happens when you actually do kind of start your economy with these investments, that brings to the like belief of the public that change could be made, because the public now knows that the government has the money. Public now knows that there are investors, and there is this money circulating in them, and so they now have a ground to demand some kind of change, such in healthcare, such in educational system. But we also believe that great investors will do these incentives on themselves, because it is more profitable to have educated people in that country working for their companies that invested there than it is to import their own educated people. So this is like the mechanism where you have, just because of the investments and just because of the rise of the economy, these benefits that the side of opposition hasn't guaranteed in any way that will happen, but we can see that by this mechanism it should happen by having greater economy. Also, they did not even try to tackle or rebuttal our problem with these people being dissatisfied by living in these countries. We're telling you these people are angry on their government, that these people do not believe in their government, they are politically apathetic, and they do not know what to do. This means that these countries are unstable even on that level, that people, because they're unhappy, they have a lower standard of living, because you cannot have a high standard of living because you're constantly believing that you're living in the misery. And that's where the celebrity and our second point that we talk about in Prime Minister's speech gets in, about having people to believe in their country and to believe that there is something good about their country is what makes them happy. And happiness is the important part for the standard of living, because you actually trying to get on the brighter side. And also we talked about discussion and political discussion and discussion on amongst the citizens. What's happening with this discussion, we're solving this political apathy that is currently present in those countries. And by that we can also assure that public pressure or all of that I was talking about that comes with the investments and people are requiring these healthcare and the education and stuff that state provides, we're more sure that people will actually do that once we get them to stop being politically apathic. So like the point of all of this is that we were showing you that these international investments is something to extremely important to get like the wheel running, to start from something. We know that this impact is not like going to be huge in the current situation, and will not do some great of a change right away, but it's something that on a long term will be actually able to provide for these countries to develop even further. And development itself, first in the economy, is what brings the development in the all other social aspects. Because as we already told you, the impacts that it brings on the individuals afterwards, and individuals generally being happy like with the investments, not only that you're there's an aspect on individuals because they're finally being hired, they're getting a job. That's not those are some things these people couldn't do before, because there were no like that larger amount of the companies in them. So because of all of that, please vote to open in government.
I thank the Speaker for their kind words, and I now call on Deputy Leader of Opposition.
each country in the world has negative and positive aspects, and they seek, especially developing countries we're talking here, seek to improve and solve their problems and issues. This is what my partner explained, and I would like to extend further on this. We want to improve. So prominent individuals, they know what's the negative. They are living in the country. They know the negative aspects and the details. They know how people live, and also they know the positive aspects. So this is why we believe that they should emphasize equally on both positive and negative aspects. Because for two reasons. Because of the reason that the opening government gave us is that of positive, showing the positive aspects. And when we also show the negative aspects equally, that will make people believe us more. And that also and also viewing these negative things, that people, the negative aspects that people from developing countries are living, and that the world and even the investors not necessarily know. This will help us significantly in improvement and seeking more improvement. I will get to POIs later. We believe, so the second thing the second argument I would like to talk about is that we believe if you want someone to believe you more, you should be honest with them and to also be objective. That would make populations and investors be convinced more to help you and to invest in your country, because they can see that you are not focusing on a specific aspect and you're neglecting to talk about the negative sides as well. This is also why we are focusing on prominent individuals, because politicians often, when they speak, they focus on some aspects. They don't view their country as a prominent individuals who, from the population itself, would view it. If a prominent individual, or we're talking about a celebrity or someone famous, they will look more honest, because they are living and they are not talking from their position they're not politicians, so they're not talking about a position of a politician. So they would appear more convincing and more honest. So we believe that these prominent individuals have bigger impact on the investors and the population. This is why it becomes more important that they are honest and objective, viewing clearly what things are like in their country, viewing both negative and positive aspects. This is how we gain trust of the investors and of the people of other populations. This is how we can improve ourselves. And refutations on what the opening government said, they suppose that the investors and other people know what's going in developing countries. Well, they don't necessarily would know everything, specifically when we are talking about the details of how people live in those developing countries. So this is why it's important that prominent individuals view both negative and positive aspects, because there are details that are not known by the other populations and by the investors. Another thing is that we are viewing, we want to emphasize in both negative and positive aspects. And doing that does not mean that we feel that we are living in misery and that we want, it doesn't mean that we are just want people to get people want to be sympathy about us and sympathetic about us, and that we are countries, developing countries, but proud of our people and of the effort we make to become better. This is what because we believe that this what would lead us to be more stable and more improved. What was the POI?
If the opposition would like to claim positive benefits of foreign investments, they have to show why these investments will happen in this situation of status quo that they're describing, because since they're obviously not happening now, and the opposition is describing the status quo.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear. Can you repeat what you said?
If the opposition would like to claim positive benefits of foreign investments, they have to show why these investments will happen in the situation of status quo that they're virtually describing, since they obviously aren't happening now to the extent that you're describing them.
Well, we think that we should focus on both positive sides and negative sides. When we emphasize on negative sides, that doesn't mean that we are not talking about the positive sides in our country. We are viewing also the positive sides. We are trying to convince the investors to invest in our country. We want to focus on both. Like, we are not just viewing the negative aspects, we are viewing both and emphasizing on both. This is why I would give the investors a clearer idea of what's like or how things are happening in our country, and that will help them help us for improvement more, and that includes that we are mentioning and we are viewing the positive aspects of our country. And thank you. I was happy to speak. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the speaker for their kind words, and everyone was a very good top half. I call now on the member of government to continue the case for their side.
So, OG told us about the capacity of help. For example, if I know that a country has problem, probably I want to help it, but that's not true. Why? Because it's less probably that, for example, if I am a person that is watching an interview or a speech of, I don't know, for example, Shakira, and Shakira says, hey, Colombia is poverty, in Colombia we have problems, and so on. Yeah, I can like feel sadness, you know, like, yeah, their people are so bad, but there's no reason because I want to help it. Why? Because probably I have my own problems, because probably here in, for example, here I am from France, I have my own problems, and even if I would want to help the people, I cannot do it. First, because I have my own problems to answer, but secondly, because Colombia is it's not near, it's in the other continent. So even if I have like ideas to help, it's not probably that I can help, because the country is not near, and it's not near, and I don't have capacity of helping even if I want to. But the second thing is that not because I just know that someone has problems, it means that I want to help. Probably I just don't want to help, and in that case, we don't believe that OG case is like strong in that way, because they don't give us mechanisms to believe that people really want to help one, or two people can to help. So I'm going to explain our case, but firstly, characterization. What means public figure? For example, a singer, for example, an actress, and what happened with these people, that they have more influence than, for example, other kind of people. For example, if I see a speech of, I don't know, Jennifer Lopez or Shakira, probably it have more impact because there are more people that want to see them, that want to hear it. For example, when we have media in the commercials, we don't see like specialist people. We have that only celebrity people using a kind of shampoo, and I say, oh, I want to use this shampoo because Shakira used this shampoo and I want to be like Shakira. We think the public of the attention that celebrities have is very, very interesting, because it doesn't care if you are poor or you're rich. You want to hear them. It doesn't care if you are if you're rich, you are poor, you want to hear it. If you are a woman or you are man, because you like media, because you like famous, and because this is very important. So we think that only all the things that these people want to say and these people say to the world are very important, and they have a very, very great impact. So what happened now? We have two things to do. Now, actually, we think that, for example, developed countries, or people that live in developing countries, have a negative idea of people that live in that live in first world, have very bad idea of people that live in developing countries. Why? Because media all the time is saying you, hey, they're poor, because movies all the time assure you they are poor and they are bad and they don't like to work, and they, for example, they are like steal your money, for example. And two, because your own politics, because for example, Trump is saying you all the time, hey, they are using our resources, hey, they are affecting our economy, hey, they don't should be here because they are displacing you. And we think that this narrative is so bad. And what is implies this, that for example xenophobia increase, and we have xenophobia and we have weight migrations now, and we think that if we want to have less problems, it's better than the leaders or the celebrities say, hey, here in my country people like to work, hey, here in my country we have a much and a diversity of culture, hey, we in my country have a biodiversity, and my people is like to work, and my people like to work hard, and my people is honest, and my people is so on. It's more probable that people in first world change their mind, and for example they see, oh, okay, they have right to work here, even if they are like they don't have like the papers right now, they have the opportunity and they have the chance because they are good people. Yeah, we think that this is a very important platform to change the narrative, but we think that this is very important because they have impacts in life, right? I think if I, like a person of first world, I start to see that people is not as bad like movies and media and my own politics say to me than they are, is probably that I can change my mind and I cannot exclude them, I cannot and I don't marginalize them because I know that they are not so bad. We have to be account that actually there are groups of radicalists and extreme right, for example, or racist groups. We think that if celebrities still continue with this narrative, this group going rising are going because they have the mentality, and they have like sympathy for this kind of thinking. And we think that if people hear the celebrities saying that, they say, hey, even you that you are from, I don't know, from Colombia, you are saying that we have right, we have to attack, we have to defend our nation, and we have all requirements to do it. So I think it's very problematic, this narrative, and this narrative if it is like increasing because of the species of celebrities. So we have, for example, that journalists and academics and opposition politicians should raise answer and no sportsmen. We have that celebrities will face nationalist, black, strange, and polarize the nation. That's what I say. If we have radical groups and we have like people that want to kill, people that want to hide their human rights because their other people are different. I think this is like the last step to people think that they're right and the people act in the way that they're mean. We think this is very, very problematic. And we think that the audience, a difference say, cannot be great big changes, but if we have the opportunity of changing their mentalities, we have, this is a better world. And what else? We are talking about many celebrities. We are not talking about one, we are not talking about two, we are talking about many celebrities, and we think that if there is a big number of celebrities, we have more new narratives, more new points of view, and we have an impact very, very more bigger, because people is not only like hearing one singer or one actress or whatever, they are constantly speaking. Why? Because normally the actors or these platforms are active, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube are active, and we have this is if the is repetitive, this message, we really can change the mind of the people, and this is a better world.
Okay, I thank the speaker for their kind words and now call on Member of Opposition to continue the case for their side.
Firstly, emphasizing on the emphasis of the permanent individuals on the positive aspects are very good for the country, but also emphasizing on the negative aspects are much more important for many reasons. Firstly, we have to show the problems and the challenges the country faces. Not only the good side, not only the positive sides of the country, but we have to focus and show the reality and the fact of the country. We have to show the problems, the challenges, and we have to find to show how people suffer, how people like think of the real situation they are living. Also, we're not talking about faking the reality. We're not talking about feeling asking for empathy or sympathy and asking for people to invest in our countries and please and we beg you. It's about showing the reality and not more than reality. Investors, I think Peter said that investors will not invest in countries that are not stable. The situation, the economic and the political situation in the country is not stable. But I have to mention that investors also care about their reputation. They care about their reputation, and if they make a country like build a country from zero and improve the economic, improve the social, like let's focus on the economic side. If the investor builds a country from zero, this will make him look better. This will make him be more known to the world and to the people of the country and to the people around him. So investing in countries that are marginalized or poor countries and making them improve ourselves, that will be a good addition to the life and the history of the investor. Also, we have to focus on in leading the permanent leaders or the permanent individuals that are outside. They are also good persons, and they are maybe in leading positions. They are in leading positions, and their voices and their words can reach to the people or to the world to the country that they are living in. Also, I'm going to say that what's the purpose of showing the positive aspects of the country while the reality is totally opposite, while the country is screwed up. We have to show the population, like if the country has 1 million population, 1 million people, and half of them face problems and face challenges, and they are living in a miserable life. So what's the purpose of showing the good aspects of the country and convincing the world that the country is very good and everything is positive and everything is all right? So we're in this way we're not helping the country. We're screwing it up, screwing the country up. We're making the country even poorer and even worse. So yeah, each country has its negative and positive aspects. We're not talking about falsing the facts. We're talking about showing the real fact, the reality of the country with its statistics or with its real stories or something like that. Also, regarding health, for example, like we have to show the real number of the real number of the hospitals. We have to mention for example, the medical possibilities, the lack of medicines or the problems that face. Like we have like we're saying in Gaza. If we're talking about in Britain or in the USA about Gaza, we're not like faking the reality. We talk everything with numbers. And the proofs. Like we say how many hospitals in Gaza, the restrictions over the borders, lack of medicines, lack of the weak medical possibilities, and the weak medical possibilities. So we're showing the real fact of the country, and many others like Sudan or many other countries that face the same problems. So yes, I have one more thing, which is just a minute. Yeah. So it's I'm gonna end up with it's okay to feel proud of your country and to show that the people or the hosting country that your mother country or your Peter, like just a minute. It's okay to show it's okay to feel proud of your country and to show the positive side. Just a minute, Peter. Like, yeah. proud of your country and to feel and to show the positive sides of your country, to show the people that your country is very good and it has positive aspects and it has good people and successful people. But you have to also focus on the reality and to show the problems of the country by showing facts and nothing more than facts. I think that's yeah, I've finished. Yes, Peter.
Even though the opening bench and the opposition bench is taking an easy route when not claiming negative impacts should be emphasized, they still have to show why this will bring more foreign aid to these countries and compare themselves to OG.
Okay. I think I have nothing to respond to him.
Sorry, Noor, are you finished?
Yes, I have nothing to answer to Peter. Yeah.
That's perfect. Sorry, I just didn't want to talk over you. Okay, I thank the speaker for their kind words, and now I call on whip proposition. My apologies. Sorry. Yeah, UCG.
Okay, so the main clashes in this debate are can the celebrities actually the celebrities have any benefit on by emphasizing any negative aspects, or should they actually just emphasize the positive aspects which can actually have benefits? And the second major clash is is it harmful if the celebrities end up emphasizing negative aspects of their nation on the international platform? Firstly, I'll talk about why celebrities can't do any benefit if they talk about negative aspects on the international platform, and so therefore they should rather focus on positive aspects. Firstly, their audience, as my partner mentioned, their audience cannot change the status quo. So if you are if you are following a celebrity or a sports person and they are talking about their nation, and you're reading this constantly as a fan about, let's say, Libya or some sub-Saharan African nation or any nation, when you're reading about the problems there, you as a fan can hardly change anything about the status quo. So and after a point you reach a compassion fatigue. So if you have celebrities and celebrities and sports person and from everyone talking, and even the mainstream media talking about problems here, there, everywhere in the world, then you reach a point of compassion fatigue where you no longer care about it, or you can't empathize about everything if you're being fed with news negative things throughout the day, throughout the week, and throughout the year, especially in these times. So you can't just empathize with everyone. That is why celebrities emphasizing on negative aspects is useless. Secondly, if I'm an investor and I'm unlikely to make my decisions based on some random statements made by an unqualified celebs or sports persons. I'm rather going to have some groundwork on the field. So I'm going to actually check whether or not I should be investing or not. So what the opening opposition has said, that it can actually gain the trust of investors, or the negatives can change their view about the country. This is unlikely to happen because investors are professionals and they have a field specialized people for doing the research about what is the status in international in other countries. So who is likely to be affected at all if celebrities are making negative statements? If Firstly, I mentioned this: the consumers, the normal lay person, is unlikely to have any. He cannot benefit or change the status quo because he's uninfluential. But on the opposite side, if they are constantly being fed with negative issues about a country, they as consumers or as or potential tourists can be affected by this constant negative feed they are getting from a nation. So if I'm hearing about the instability in a nation, for example, I'm hearing about the situation in India, and I'm listening that there are riots, there are problems, there are a minority is being marginalized. So then I'm unlikely to visit India, because I think that it is not safe and secure there. But rather, if as a celebrity I can show positive aspects about my nation, then on the international platform, then I'm likely to attract more tourists, and people will feel that this country should be visited. And secondly, the celebs, it is not their job, and they are not qualified, they lack the nuances of information to make such statements about negative statements about their nation. So if they're rather, it is the job of academics, journalists, and opposition politicians who should be portraying the reality of the nation. Celebrities are actually can act as positive impacts for the international platform. By doing so, they can improve the image of the diaspora living elsewhere. So if they emphasize on positive aspects, but since they are not qualified, that is why they are unlikely to change the status quo. The government is not going to listen to celebrities from nations to change their foreign policy, or the investors, as I mentioned, are not going to change any of their policies based on statements made by celebs. But rather, what is the problem, their statements, their negative statements, can actually harm the status quo. And why is it so? Firstly, since consumers can't actually differentiate between are unlikely to differentiate between private companies and national companies. So if there is something bad about, let's say, about China being portrayed by their celebs or their local people, or any country, so you are so even if you are willing to change the status quo, what you will end up doing is you are going to boycott products of companies made from that nation. So for example, I might end up boycotting anything made in China or made in so and so country, for example. So what happens is this actually harms the private companies in that nation. Secondly, it stigmatizes the diaspora. So once I know that, for example, in this country, people are being treating minorities in so and so way, it creates a stereotype image in my mind, and this racial stereotype is going to further is going to harm the image of the diaspora of that nation living here. Okay. And so it is, and it can cause this, and because of this stigmatization of the diaspora and people, it causes polarization on the international scale, as my partner mentioned, through xenophobia, and also within the nation. So people are going to be divided into is going to be more divided. So people in the end up boycotting celebrities from their own nation because they don't subscribe to this view. So if you have one celeb saying this, an anti-establishment celebrity, so if there are nationalists, right-wing nationalists, they will end up boycotting them, and they won't be buying their products or listening to them anymore. So this causes polarization both on the national as well as the international scale. So rather, what celebs can do is they can use their influence to emphasize positives, to attract tourism, to make the diaspora proud and increase their acceptance among other people. For example, Afro-Americans, they are so they can improve their image, and that is how they can have a very positive impact. And if they emphasize negatives, they are unlikely to have any good benefit for their nation or on the national or international scale. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the speaker for their kind words and call with opposition to summate the debate as a whole.
Okay, actually, I would thank the whole members of this debate first. Then I truly believe, in the sake of my argument, that celebrities are not the right place to show the country identity, to show the country positives or negatives aspects. Actually, politicians, decision makers would be the right and the clear mirror for this section. Celebrities' job is not totally to influence people to come and visit their countries or to come and invest in their countries. Actually, we have a full paid advertisement or that that really paid such persons or such celebrities, certain celebrities, to show the good effects or the good aspects of the country. It is not about showing the good aspects of the country. Actually, celebrities, they have influence, okay, on audience, but how deep this does this influence is? How deep? Actually, they have nothing to do to improve the investments of the country, as the opening government say that celebrities and business leaders would even if they show the positive sides of the country, they would improve the investment in their country. But this is totally untrue, actually. Why? Because investment would not be based on a celebrity's speech about their own countries. Investments will not be built upon or let's say such a public speak for their audience. Once all business leaders, all celebrities emphasize the good aspects of their countries, actually, let's just assume for a second that this would affect the investment or the situation of the country. But let's say that if this affect, once all business leaders and all celebrities emphasize good aspects of their countries, this would draw actually like a paradise picture for their country, with no mentioning for the negative sides of their country. This would just draw a paradise. So why I am an investor come to such a nice place and a nice country as they say to invest in? So the investors won't invest in a paradise place or country. And instead, once I am a honest celebrity and I show the negative sides along with my positive sides, actually freely, with no any opposition over my speech or my opinion, actually the investors will feel the need to invest in solving problems in such a place that I am providing the clear picture for it. Another argument I would say for the deputy minister in government, they claim that this showing showing the positive aspects of the country would just change minds to the audience to visit the country, to invest in it. But isn't it just a very small impact and a very short-term impact? For why should we care just to let certain individuals of the 1 million audience to come into my country? How does this would develop my country economy if this is your value? Actually, this is our argument. Another point to add here in my argument, that showing negative aspects of my country will not harm the country position. Why? Actually, because showing harm, this would just make it like a clear, actually an honest view of my country. Besides that, international platforms, when just it is valid for those celebrities and for those actually business leaders, this would not just be like a table for providing their nationalism or their countries. Actually, it's not this point. Our argument is not show that I am really support my country and I really like to support it, but actually it's to show my perceptions of my country, show the clear opposition, to show the clear perception for my point of view. So business leaders have something to do with the bad holes in my economicals of my country, not to show my country as a paradise. So those holes, if they have an influence of their countries, this influence would be very, very limited to their audience, very limited to show this to fix problems or to fix economical problems. we say here in closing opposition, we say that celebrities, if they have the opportunity to talk and speak for I'm not taking a point of view of information actually. Okay, if these celebrities have to do something to do with their countries, actually they would make something like full paid advertisements, or just, and this would actually attack the value of nationalism. This is just will be like solely for personal salary, or for just making an economical benefit for such this family. And how much time do I have actually? Still, do I have time?
6:30.
Okay, so I am happy to claim that celebrities are not the right place actually to entities and positive and negative. If they, if we assume for a second, this speaking about the negative sides will never harm the country position, but instead this would provide a very clear image of my country. And thank you. I'm happy to close.
Okay, I thank the current speaker, and everyone was a very good debate. So I'm going to give you guys the call, though I don't think it's actually that important for training. Just I think it's worth knowing where you came, and then I'm going to give you all general feedback, because I think there's a bunch of stuff that was just slightly wrong done in this debate, but like little things that make the difference. And then I'm going to go through quite detailed team by team feedback. So it will take longer than the normal rushed feedback, but this is a training session, so I think that's the point. If I am talking too quickly at any point, please tell me. I know I do. Okay. So I gave the call as follows. I gave the first to closing government, the second to opening government, the third to opening opposition, and the fourth, unfortunately, to closing opposition. So the feedback to do, I think there is two technical points that is important to note in this, because most teams suffered from it, and back half teams in particular. There was a problem of knifing in this debate. That means saying something that directly contradicts either your own team or the team ahead of you. So the one I'm thinking of here is both back half teams said that investors don't listen to people who are influential. So therefore the other sides, so closing government said investors don't listen to this, or closing opposition says investors don't listen, so opening government's benefits don't happen. The problem is your opening opposition has explained why it is that by being honest, investors will listen to them. That means that the top half assumed that prominent figures could have an influence over investors. Both sides had points. That means that when you say investors don't listen to them, that directly knifes your opening, even if it also attacks your opening government. It's really important not to do that, because the rules of judging are I can't credit any of that analysis. And that happened for both closing government teams, closing government and closing opposition. So closing opposition, you said investors don't listen, and closing government, you're very specific, you go into more detail, and actually you end up wasting more of your own time by explaining how they do their own research, why they don't trust celebrities, why celebrities aren't who they credit, because your opening government has said this is a mechanism by which we can get investors to trust, and have explained why people believe them. So it's just an argument I can't credit. And it's a really easy mistake to make, and it's so important to be watching the debate. I also think some teams had internal tension, in particular opening opposition. You guys both explained the particular harms when you promote positive images of countries that have issues, and then in your second speech talked about how we're going to promote both positive and negative images. I didn't discredit it, because I don't think it was too in contention, but it's very close to being knifing your own team, and that's a big problem, because it means amounts of your own arguments don't get credited, and particularly with team speeches, that can mean you lose 7 minutes worth of material. So that's just something that I think really needs to be watched out for, because it just means a massive waste of time for yourselves. It means your arguments, and maybe your best arguments, don't get credited. So it's really important. The second technical thing that I think again, it happened in back half, but I think this is important for everyone to know, is WIP cannot add new material. WIP is only, the reason for this is not just a fussy debate rule. The thought behind it is people have the least time to respond to the whip. So if you're closing opposition whip, you have exactly 7 minutes in which anyone can respond to you. And what closing government, same idea, there's only one speech they can reply to you in. So you can, the point is to not be allowed to add new material so that it's a fair debate. So that's why it's done and why it's enforced. It's not just kind of a preference. Both closing government and closing opposition, I think, gave really good points in the whip, but points that I couldn't credit. So in closing government, that ended up being, you talked about how boycotts will occur and why people won't act as tourists in these regions. I think that, and particularly because you gave an analysis to why lay people are likely to respond like this and why it is that tourists won't occur and why that's a detriment. That's not just an example adding on to a point. That's actually a new analysis point about the economic harms of negative discussion within and debate within it. And I don't think it exists in the debate. I tried to see if OG brought it up, but they specifically focused on investors and individuals in the state. So it was just new material. Can I finish saying what I have, and then Peter, you can absolutely ask a question. Is that all right? So that became a problem of that side. Closing opposition. Similarly, I think you gave really good new analysis about like why they should take an apolitical stance and why that's so important. I don't think that's totally new material. So I think you were okay, but I think you got very close to it. So I think be very careful to make sure all the analysis links of your partner speech are in that and before you jump onto it, because whip speeches should be about, here's what we said, here's what they said, and say that briefly, or be like, oh, just flag the point, here's what we said and here's why we won that argument. Whip speeches are all about trading off what's already happened in the debate, not adding new points in. Peter, what's your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask when CG claims about these negative impacts of like negative perception and riots and whatever, how does this compare to our claim that these impacts from both sides would also likely be marginal, even if they're positive or negative?
So I'll do that when I go through the debate, if that's okay. These are two just technical points I thought needed to stand out beforehand. I'll explain all the clashes when I start with you guys and work through. Is that all right?
Yeah, all right, thank you.
It's just easier so I can do it all in one go. So those are the two technical points. Those are, I think, worth spending time on just because it's a big problem for teams, and teams who are doing so well can lose out to knifing or because their important point is in their whip. So I think that I just want to flag that and spend time. Other general points of feedback, I don't think there was enough POIs in this debate. I think that there really could have been more. You don't want to give people the whole 7:15 to talk to themselves. You should be trying to POI them. And speakers, if you're not getting offered a POI, I think it's not a bad practice to ask for a POI, to go and if you do that, you take control of when you get your POI. So it's actually a good strategy. But plus, if no one offers you one, at about 4 minutes, if you go any POIs on this, so if you finish your first point, and if no one offers you one, then that they look bad, but you look good for showing engagement. But try to give POIs, try to take them. The other thing I think, which came up for all teams in the debate, and this will lead me into our explanation, I think a lot of people gave very good impacts. I think most teams were missing analysis as to why what they said was true, and that came down to, I think CG was the best at giving analysis about why the impacts they claimed would be true, and I think that becomes important in a few of the clashes. But I think could be a real thing to be aware of is like you have to prove why the world you say is true, not just why there are benefits to your side, without explaining what world you're talking about, because it's all about framing and that. So that moves us nicely on to how the clash in the debate went, why it fell the way it did. So we start with opening government. I think you guys opening government give us essentially 3 key points throughout both speeches. They'll go more detail through both of them. Firstly, about investors, I think explaining how they're likely to engage with this, why that's something we should care about. Secondly, about changes in ideas. They have 2 metrics into this. The first one, which I think is explained quite well, is about building discourse, countering narratives. The second one, which I think is less built up in the way maybe it should be, is explaining how that people are engaged with things in a different way and therefore they challenge government in a different way. I think that probably needed more analysis, but I think stands in the debate. And thirdly, I think you talk about individuals building up self-identity and how that engages with it, which I think again is somewhat lacking in the analysis about specifically why it is that people will respond to celebrities in the way that you say they will. But I think stands in the debate, and I don't think gets addressed, is that like people within these countries maybe should be getting built up. I think you guys are a team that suffers from the missing analysis. So like you're an OG team, it's about being like, who are the actors? What are the alternatives? Why is ours the best way to do it? So I think you guys, it was a miss on your an unfortunate miss in your opportunity, and it meant that the top half became tighter than it maybe should have been because you're missing those things. In particular, so in the Prime Minister's speech, I think you just skip explaining what the issue is. I think it then gets built up in your partner's speech, where she's like, the status quo is that people have negative perceptions about these countries, that politicians promote these negative things, charities talk about them, and here's the bunch of harms that occur from that. But I think it's strange not to have it in the Prime Minister's speech, because the Prime Minister is supposed to be the person introducing what's the harm, why are we solving this. So I think that is a miss for you. That being said, I think you do the impacting very well. I think you explain why investors are more likely to listen to respected business people and like influential people in particular, because they are business people, they're different to politicians, they're someone they particularly relate to. I think that's well done. I think that seems credible. I think you probably could have been more explicit about why we care about investors. I think as it is, it's like money's probably good, which I think is true, but I think you could be more explicit. And again, that would be about setting up that urgency, about being like, these countries are countries that have been systemically harmed from lack of economic investment, from countries taking from them, from colonization. They need investment to try and compete on the world stage in order to not just develop their own economy, but develop things like healthcare systems, things like education systems, all of which stem from a country which has more income. I think those kind of stuff would have been like more explicit impacting, because I think it's sort of implicit and sometimes done, but could have been just much clearer and stronger and set the urgency of the debate. I think your stuff on populations is good. I think this is like, I think at points it slightly gets messy, because it goes between populations and then you talk about businesses back again, and then you go back to talking about the individuals. But I think overall, I think the points you're trying to make are very well made, are very, very clear. I think you talk about like the need for positive change, why it is that people see and constantly perceive their countries being negatively talked about. I think you are the one who's more explicit about like how discourse exists in these countries right now, where there's a lot of like criticism and a lot of like negativity. And then I think your partner builds up this kind of idea of political apathy, and that this creates an alternative narrative for people to build in and invest in. And then I think then you nicely challenge like I think you do a way off of like this idea of creating false hope, and you're like, no, the point is there's benefits to all sides of this. There's positives even in negatives. I think you get positives even in negatives. I think you're a little stuck in example tennis. But I think your point is well made. So that's just a time management thing, because you only have 7 minutes. You want to try and use your time as best as well. I think just have one clear example of like a positive and a negative, whereas you kind of talked about Corona and then you tried to talk about countries, and it took too long. But I think this is just a strategy thing, because this is training. I think it would have been worth be more succinct on that. I think that it could help you. So at the end of your speech, I think you haven't set up the urgency to the degree you want, but I think you've given me reasons to think this might be a good thing to do, and investments in it. I think you somewhat too heavily rely on implicit of developing and stuff like that. This didn't weigh into the debate because no one calls you on it, but this is for strategy. I think being very explicit, particularly in Prime Minister, about why it's so important, what is this issue, that we must address it now, that this is the way to do it, I think is a really compelling way to make the PM speech, because it sets your team as very firmly, it forces all other teams to explain how their policy directly answers your problems in the way that you've set it up. So it gives you a lot of control over how the debate goes. So I think urgency could have really helped you. But I think the points are well made, and I think particularly your internal stuff about people needing to feel good about themselves is very good. But again, I think you could have just gone a little more explicit on impacting. I know you also say it's a very marginal debate. I think it probably is. I don't know if you have to spend as long conceding it as you do. I think you could be like, this is probably not going, I think one way to do that better would have been to be like, this debate probably doesn't come down to will the world stop giving us funding, or will people fail to understand the need for development. That is obviously not likely to happen just because we speak positively about this country. Instead, what this is about is changing perceptions, one on an international stage, but we think probably more significantly on an internal stage. I think that's a better way than just saying this is a marginal debate, because it more specifically challenges what the likely opposition is, because like I think you probably could predict it, and given how responsive your DPM was, I think you guys had a good idea of the debate. So I think that is a way to talk about marginality without like narrowing it in the way you did, which is to like slightly downplay your own arguments, because you're like, this is a marginal debate, and then I'm like, well, I guess then marginally investors are engaged. So I think it's always better to be like, if you want to concede it's a marginal debate, I think that's fine. But I think the way to do it is always to be like, point out what the ops probably grand points are going to be, explain why they're implausible, and explain why, in fact, what's most important is whatever you've decided are the marginal benefits. So in this case, it is why investors might be more, sorry, yeah, I'll slow down. please do tell me. I know I speed up the longer I talk. So it's about, what was I saying? It's about explaining why the op is not, like, whatever you think the grand objectives of the op might be, explaining why they're not important, and then explaining why yours are more plausible, I think is a better strategy than just saying it's a marginal debate and then hoping judges apply that to other teams. Again, a lot of this doesn't come into, I'll explain the clash as I go along because I'm explaining strategy as well. The DPM, I think you did a really good job in responsiveness. I think you were very, very clear about how you were challenging it. So I think you set up very nicely the status quo versus now. I think that is a very good challenge to the opening opposition, who have set up the debate as people will miss it or we're not getting the help in. I think you're better. I think it's a clever way to be like, look, they're talking about the status quo. The status quo is we do know that these countries are having problems. That isn't a secret. This isn't something that we're over. It's not like we're lying, or like, it's not that we're, the only narrative coming out is that this will be good. Instead, the narrative will now be countering the status quo assumption that developing nations are just bad places to live or economically unstable. I think that was very good. I also think you do I think you very nicely rebuild your partner speech. Like, I think that's a very good team management, and that I think you talk about, like, the comparative between the rescue and help solution that opening opposition has done, and then you trade it off to the public change, the idea of why investors and having more economics in it. And I think you are the one who explains why it's so important to have investors in it, though I think, again, it probably could have done with just a small amount more building up. Just explaining why it is that they want to invest. And I think you give the company wants more educated people, from more educated people. I think you'd be like talking about this, like, they also want to have control of a region. Like, China invests a phenomenal amount in Africa and African nations because it wants to have the control of the region. So it wants to be the major power that they rely on. And private businesses similarly work like that. So I think that's like trying to explain just specifically, not just that they like benefit from being there, but why they might want to be there beyond it feeling stable, could have done a little bit more, but that's nitpicking. I actually think you like pretty firmly explained to me why it is public change matters. I think the third thing about the political apathy is the bit that, like, I understand the points, the impacts I think are very good and clear, but I think the analysis to get there is a bit lacking. So I think you're like, there's political apathy, it's seen as unstable, and there's a low quality of life. And then you say help leaving a country will lead to changes in government discussion and more likely to engage with it. I think that just needs a little more work. Why is it that, like, Shakira talks up Colombia and suddenly I, as a person from Colombia, are able to look past this low quality of life, apathy with government, to feel more pride and in that degree engage more with government? I think there just needs to be, and I don't think it's hard analysis, I think you're both well capable of it, but I think there just needs to be a little bit more in it. But overall I thought it was a very good DPM speech. So weighing off the top half teams, I think you guys, bringing in opening opposition, I think you guys have 3 key points over the 2 speeches, some of which are in tension with each other, but I think which should be noted. Firstly, I think you talk about, like, the need to get help in, and that sharing and explaining the problem is a faster, more effective way to do that, because there are issues that need to be addressed and glossing over them isn't a good solution. I think the second thing you say is that, like, when you paint a rosy picture, a positive picture, this hides the problems and devalues the problems. And here I think, and then you bring in a third point, which is about, like, credibility, which I think is very good. I actually think probably should have been in the leader of opposition, or at least POI'd to the OG, because they weren't able to engage with it, which becomes a bit of a problem. But I think the comparison falls in other metrics. But I think it's worth noting you should try and not backload, which is when you put all your, like, put one of your strongest arguments, or like the most destructive argument in DLO, because there are some internationals that don't allow that. So Worlds and Euros sometimes say you shouldn't credit backloaded cases against top half. So you could lose on that, which is, you just don't want to have happen. So just POI it in, or have it flagged in your partner's speech so that there's enough evidence that they have an ability to respond to it. That being said, I think it's very good. when you come to trading off the top half, what becomes the problem is that, well, I think that the DPM very strongly challenges you on your the need to get help in, or that this will cover it over by explaining why it is that you're defending the status quo, and therefore that these problems are known about and that these don't get answered. You then, in second speaker, when you're talking about credibility and how building credibility is how you get investment in, you get POI'd again, being like, but you're defending the status quo. And the status quo is that people don't focus, even if they are talking about both, people aren't investing, people don't feel like it's stable, people aren't listening to this balance of it. I think the problem is I'm not sure, you'd have to tell me if you were trying to counterprop it that instead of like trying to say people should talk about both, if you were to counterprop, so that is like offering a model from the opposite side. Sorry if I'm explaining stuff I just don't know the skill level in the room, so I'm going to explain everything, and if you know what a counterprop is or whatever, good. So I think if you were trying to counterprop and be like, right now celebrities talk too much about negative, we think they should talk about both equally, that has to be in the leader of opposition speech. You can't counterprop from deputy leader of opposition. It's the only position in the debate that includes back half. Back half can't counterprop. The only person in the debate who can counterprop is the leader of opposition. But as it was, you are standing over the status quo because you hadn't counterpropped. So while you're like, they should talk about them both equally, you have to explain, that means you have to explain why in the status quo they're doing that, or specifically why the way they're doing the status quo, and you say the way they're doing the status quo is not all negative, but that they talk about both, why that is an effective model. So that when you get POI'd in about your credibility, so then when you get POI'd about being like, but you're defending the status quo, and status quo is there aren't investors coming into these places, people do have low self-identity, people do have low political apathy, it becomes very hard to credit the impact of your case about like why they aren't suited, why prominent people aren't suited in this position, and like why they will get the changes you claim. So when weighing off the top half, it falls down on this, that like, I think your credible argument makes me question the OG's investors, but I think makes me question their OGs, or I'm like, maybe it won't be as effective as they've said it will be, but you haven't addressed any of their like internal workings of the country arguments, which I think falls to their side. I also just think that they've quite strongly responded to your material, so it ends up going in their favor. As individual speakers, I think leader of opposition, I think you set up a good frame about it. I think you brought, like, the entire debate tends to agree there's positives and negatives to both. I think again there was a slight problem of like a need to set up urgency in the debate or explain why it is that there's so much harm being done on their side. So I think a lot of your responsiveness is internal rather than specifically flagged and directly against them. And I think that could have significantly helped you if you'd more directly challenge their debate, more directly challenge the two key arguments they're running on, which is first the investors, which you do take a go at, but secondly internal workings and why that's not likely to happen in the way they do. I also think that you had a slight habit of like blurring analysis and impacts together. So you split, instead of being like, instead of explaining why there's a lot of problems in a state, here is how raising awareness of them publicly makes them better. So by analyzing why it is that who celebrities are, so again, looking at actors, which I thought was missing in this debate, explaining why celebrities are in a bad position to do it, or why they're in a good position to raise awareness about negative situations. Then explain like, so why they're in a good position to do this, why people are likely to listen to you in the way that you say, and then from there the impact of like, and this looks like healthcare, and give an impact of how that changes culture and how the impact of how that changes, and economics and the impact of how that changes. What you ended up doing was like economics and healthcare and culture, but because they're all basically the same point but in three different contexts, it just meant you spent a lot of time repeating yourself or proving the same point but in different contexts. So it just ended up with like repeating yourself, and it's just like, it's not useful for your time. Like, you want to try and get through this. I think again, things like if you feel like you don't have a lot of material within the debate, I think the leader of opposition is the perfect position to be a really responsive position. And I do think that was probably part of the problem with your time management, is that's like leader of opposition tends to be kind of like a responsive case and then flagging the main points and some analysis, whereas because you hadn't done much responsiveness, I think that affected your time. It doesn't matter if you talk to 7 minutes, but if you were worried about only talking for, I think it was 4.5 or 5, then I think that could have helped your time. But as it was, I think you had some credible impacts. I think you did the important thing of setting up a unique harm to their side. That was that when you promote positive, you necessarily hide negative, and that's a harm. Though I don't think you impacted particularly, but I think you set up a unique damage to their side that they need to respond to. And I think you give some credible reasons as to why it's important that we talk about the negative as well. But again, I think building a little more analysis about specifically like why the world works in the way you think it does, why it is that talking about negative is likely to have the effect you want, not just because I think at times it was slightly too simplistic to just be like, need to show and then they'll solve. Because like if you want to say the world works like that, I think you need to explain why it's true that world works like that. And you can talk about things like the UN and charities and like proof that people are willing to put themselves below the needs of others. But I think either you need to explain that more, or I think possibly a better claim is to explain why it is that negative images tend to incentivize people to want to change, which I think is probably more what you were getting at. But just a bit more analysis about why people act in the way they will would have helped you, because not having that analysis meant that OG could claim that you were talking about the status quo, and here's why all the harms of status quo exist and why their alternative is better by the fact that it is an alternative and that they can build in particular ways that they changed because they've analyzed it. And then CG in particular hits you quite hard and is very succinct in taking you guys down when they talk about why people can't respond the way you will, but also that they won't respond. And because you don't have any analysis to weigh it off, I have to credit their version of the world. And that's what I meant about like analysis is just so essential to debating. Like you all are doing the impacting, which means you understand the analysis, because you have to understand that to get to the ideas of why it should matter. So you're doing the hard bit, but it's really important to be explicit about like the analysis. What is your world? Why are the things you're saying true? And there's the impacts from it. So that's one thing for leader opposition. Deputy leader, I think the same slight problem, same thing again. I think there was a lack of analysis in it about being specific, though I do think you had more. I do think I think you did something that I think should have probably been a leader of opposition, is like, who are prominent individuals? Why are they likely to be engaged in them both? Why do we value it? I think you do. I think that's a good point. I just think it maybe would have been useful in the yellow just to set up the debate, but I think it's important. I think you set up basically if you let them be seen as credible, they can get more improvement, so they can be seen better, they can be like push things forward in it. And I think that you set up that basically that they're versus politicians, which I think is very good, and I just don't think just gets done in the debate very much, which is comparing politicians to prominent figures and why they're in a particularly suited position, so that them being apolitical is a benefit, and then you say they'll be perceived as more honest. I think you need to analyze more on that, but I think you've got the right comparison there. I just think so I think you're oddly in this position. I think your analysis is done well. I just don't think you've explained why it's important. So you're like, they'll be seen as, I think you set up like why they can be seen as credible and why they're important. I think you give me some reason to think that like politicians being apolitical might be bad, but I don't think you tell me why politicians being apolitical is bad, or sorry, why politicians being political and these people being apolitical is benefit to them, because it is actually a unique benefits of framing. So that's good, but you need to just follow through on the analysis and explain specifically why that's true. I think the big thing that harmed you was just not engaging with the status quo analysis. Like not engaged in status quo analysis, and I don't think there was a significant enough attempt to deal with OG's internal changings points. I think those are the two things that slipped you up, but I think your analysis was, so I think this is about strategizing how you use material, so possibly putting slightly more in your leader of opposition speech so that you have more time for responsive material, I think could have helped. Let me see, because you put, like, I think you do some responsiveness to it, but I think you put it at the end, which slightly rushes you. I also think you just don't expand on it enough. So you take them on of like, oh, they know about it in the developing world, be like, oh, but they don't know all the details of it. That's true, but that just tells me, that makes me doubt how much they know. It doesn't tell me why it's so important they need to know more. So it's about taking your analysis that step further. So not just being like, oh, you're wrong, but explaining why it matters that they're wrong. So that in that case, it would be like knowing it's developing, like, but they don't know the details of it. Like they might know that like Sudan has low economic activity, but they don't realize the high mortality rate among women who give birth or among children. These are the specific details that are so important because they can incentivize people to change. They can be particularly emotive, but also they're the big crises. And thinking, if you just think that all developing countries have problems but don't know the specific problems, that's not enough to incentivize people to change. So it's kind of, I think that could have really helped to responsiveness, because I think that did become an issue. It's just kind of, I think you pointed out bits where they were like, you made me doubt some of their cases. The other POI you respond to is like, oh, you can promote both, but he's like, sorry, it's when you try and clash against like why promoting positive and you clash it to promote both. But again, I think you need to analyze why it is so. I think you need to just go that step further and talk about why there's harms to their side and not just point out that like there's other things to do. Because I just think that's like the surface level of responsiveness, whereas it needs to take not just that like, oh, they're wrong, but explain why they're wrong and you're better is like, and that's that weighing stuff and debating that like can really tip for a team. So that's the top half, and that's specific feedback for you both. Moving into back half. Back half, CG does 3 things I think are very useful for them. Firstly, I think they take on people. They talk about people, why it is that firstly, they probably don't want to necessarily help. They may not be able to engage with it. You know, Shakira saying that people are suffering, you might be like, I admire them, but that doesn't necessarily mean you like admire them enough to put your own needs ahead of them. So secondly, don't want to help, but more than that, even taking like at their best case, that they don't want to help, that they can't help them. Like that there's a lot of systemic stuff that people just can't change, that they're unlikely to be able to change even if celebrities were to flag it. I then think they do something that I think is missing in the top half, which is specifically why public figures are likely to be able to be influential on people. And note by this stage, because they've set up why they're unlikely to be able to respond to negative things, that explicitly that means that there's reasons why they can respond to positive, though I think I think they explain why people are likely to admire and respond to them and how ads, people can be influenced with them. And I think they use a very effective example of ads and why people like buy stuff because Britney Spears advertises it. They then set up that there's like a specific harm which exists. And I do think this is distinct from anything the OG has set up, which is that there's a big problem of cultural international perception of countries. This happens for numerous reasons. They give good analysis about why media does it. They then talk about why politicians are doing it and how they do it. And then what this says is that because people admire public figures like celebrities so much, they are able to counter the racism in this and able to address it. And they give 2 points which don't come out of the whip so they can stand, which is firstly that improves the lives of the individuals in these countries and the minorities, and you should care about them. And secondly, that far-right groups rely on this sort of narrative, so it is actually constructive to be destructive of this. I then also think they take the debate away from the marginality that people keep implying by being like, look, if lots of celebrities do this, there's probably is some like net benefit to this. So even if it's like not an economic change, we think we're focusing specifically on why it changes identity. How does that fit into what we've heard in the debate? I think when weighing it to opening opposition, the reason they take it over you is what I flagged before. I think they, like, given one of the major claims in yours is that the urgency is like that people want to help and that this is a way to, that you need to tell people about negative things to get help. They explain why that's just not an effective mechanism to do it and why people can't engage with it, so therefore it's not appropriate. I think then your other argument about credibility, I think again, because they're not framing, because their arguments, they're taking like, oh, people do buy into celebrities. I think that's a characterization that challenges that idea that like people want to see them as credible, but also because their impacts focus on an alternative mechanism, that credible argument doesn't actually attack their benefits in the way to the degree it wanted to. So while it's, again, I'm like, maybe it isn't good that celebrities are super positive about it, but because your impacts of credibility haven't been able to stand in the debate, it's hard to credit them. I also think they do some nice challenges and responses throughout both speeches, particularly Whip, to some of the stuff from OO. So that's how weighing against them. Basically, we think that I think they've attacked your central premise of how your central main benefit that's standing in the debate at this point, because not defending status quo means it's hard to credit the rest of that. But so I think they've challenged your premise of like how people respond, but I also think they've explained why they might be, but also because your main point that still stands about credibility is not contingent on their analysis, because their analysis talks about why it is that this addresses racism internationally and reduces it and improves lives. So that this credibility of investors, which is how you frame it, isn't relevant to their argument. So that's how they fall against you. So I think they've done sufficient challenges, and I think they've built points that are stronger and able to stand in the debate even against your strong points. Putting them in against OOG, I think what becomes the difference for you guys, firstly, is I think you are more vulnerable to the challenge of credibility than they are, because you haven't spent time analyzing actors and explaining why it is that they'll be likely to be believed in this way, or like the trade-off of it. But between the two of you, I think while you provide some reasons to believe that investors might invest, and I think that's good, I don't think you've told me particularly, except for implicitly, why we should care about that. And again, I think your idea of changes and changing ideas and building up self-concept, well, I think you've given me some reasons to think that should be good. I don't think you've hit hard enough as to why we should care very specifically about this. In comparison, I think that CG set up a much clearer, this is a problem and this is how we're solving it, that more specifically identifies, they're like, this is a problem, we can't address everything. So I think it both fits within your marginality claims, by which they're like, they're not trying to change the world with this, they don't think that everyone will listen to us, but they think there's a subgroup of people who like celebrities, who are likely to engage this, who can't engage with negative rhetoric, which I think is a strong point in of itself, but also specifically why they're likely to engage with positive rhetoric, and that though that engagement with positive rhetoric can have ripple out effects. I think it becomes tight because I don't think either of you go to the full extent of like, here's why this point is so important and here's why you should care about it. But I think that CG does a much more detailed explanation about what this problem is and why specifically solves it. Whereas your case, I think you've given me reasons to think it might be a nice thing to do, but not specifically why there's such an urgent problem with when celebrities talk about negative topics, whereas I think they're specifically like, there's a harm to negative topics and there's a specific benefit that we uniquely get on our side. So that's how it ends up trading between the two of you. In terms of individual speakers, member of government, I thought you were very, very good. I think your responsiveness was really strong. I've said it a few times, but I was like, it's hard to beat a team in responsiveness, but in rebuttal alone, and I think your case did a really good attack on them, though I do think you should have also tried to engage with their credibility point, because I think that was standing in the debate and did make me like question where things were going, but in the end, because I didn't think your points were contingent on it, I thought you could take it, but it's not a good idea not to engage with the strongest material of the team. But I think you did a good job. I think setting up the public figure and why it is people buy into them was well explained. And again, I think was a good watching of the debate, being like, what's missing from this debate, and how can I push beyond that? Like, what's missing this debate? How can I analyze it for our side? And then I think you do a very good analysis about like how the status quo looks, why it is the media portrays people like that, why it is the politicians created by that, and why we should care about the xenophobia and how this answers it. I think the things to watch out were, firstly, I think you were lacking in really hard hitting the impact. I think you're like, this addresses racism and here's mechanisms for which you do it. I think you can go harder and be just like, you should care about this. Racism is in escalation in lots of countries. Politicians and media are often the ramping points for this, which means that the lives these people are getting frequently much, much worse. You should care about this group. You should, like, this is a mechanism to help them. We've told you why. So I think just like going harder and more explicit about why you should care would be good, and I think would have helped you. I also think that like, yeah, I think that probably is the big advice. The other thing I would say, and this is just in general for teams, again, like lots of this feedback I'm giving to individuals wasn't like I waded into judging, because that's not how judging works. But I think in terms of tactics, I think it is nearly always a good idea from the member of government to explain how you're taking the debate past something that the top half has missed. So in this debate, I would have been like, top half is focused a lot on whether investors will buy into this, and how and top half has discussed in detail why it is that investors are likely to either buy in or vote from either sort of media. I don't know if either side has conclusively proven that, but I think the more important thing in this is that this debate has, I don't think either side has credibly proven this. What's more importantly though, is I don't think anyone has tried to engage with how it is that the negative and positive perceptions of a developing nation affect the wider global interactions and economic interactions beyond just, and will investors invest, but how do individuals both from that country and outside of that country and minorities in other countries engage with it. I think that's like, that was too wordy, but I'm thinking on the fly, but basically trying to set up a frame and being like, this is what the top half has talked about. Here's something I think they're missing. Here's what we uniquely bring you. Because back half always have a disadvantage because you only have 7 minutes to add analysis, whereas the top half have 14 minutes. So I think it's always a good idea to be like, here's what the debate is missing, here's why we're addressing it. Because I think you do actually do that in your speech implicitly, but I think it can always be really good to just set it up the debate being like, we are here now, here's how we're going to win. But I think in general, your point was I think your analysis was actually very well thought out and explained. I think just a little bit harder hitting on the impacts could have helped you, but that's just nitpicking. The whip, I think you do struggle from having new material in your debate. I think you in particular have this issue of when you talk about the economic changes of it, I think that could have been like a really natural second point to your like addressing racism point, because you've already set up why media and politicians are inappropriate sources and why people are likely to listen to positive feedback from celebrities but not negative feedback or negative portrayals. So I think like I think the economic tourism stuff was just like great, but just in the wrong speech. I thought it was well analysed and well explained, but it needed to be in your partner's speech because I just couldn't credit it. Similarly, the boycotting, which you talked about in the far right, I think that is sort of an extension on from your partner flagging the far right stuff. Though because the far right, though I think like because the far right stuff is only sort of mentioned in about 3 lines, I think that could have really naturally bolstered up that impact and made it more explicit about the 2 impacts you have, whereas like as it came down to it, I mostly felt like you'd proved 1 impact and said the far right relied on this too, whereas I think like explaining about boycotting could have been a really particular way to really specific good mechanism of an analysis and impact about how that would work. So just, I think that's just being really careful, talking during prep time, talking in the debate to make sure that like if there's something you want to analyze, you should impact, or if you want something you want to flag that she also has in her speech. The other thing to watch out for is you knifed. You were one of the ones who knifed. I know I talked about this earlier, but just being very careful about your responsiveness, because it was a really strong piece of responsiveness to OO, but unfortunately because of what you wrote, you had said you couldn't run it, so you needed a different analysis. In general, I think it is a good idea in WHIP to go team by team, so talk about both of the other side and your own bench and bench way. I know people make jokes about it, but I actually think WHIP is one of the messiest positions to do, and it is the clearest way to do it. Because I think at points I could tell which teams you were targeting, at points I couldn't tell if this was new analysis, but even if I hadn't been worried about it being new, at points I couldn't see what, so for example, even if your partner had talked about the tourism stuff, it wasn't clear to me which team you were trying to challenge that against and weigh that against. And I think that you don't want to leave it up to the judges to decide who you're weighing against. You want to make sure the judges know you've weighed against everyone. All of debating and all of weighing in particular is about trying to let the judges judge as little as possible and you spending as much time as possible proving why you've won. And WHIP is the particular position where you've got this great opportunity to be just like, here's what they said, here's what we said, here's why we've won that. And that then doesn't let me judge it. It's because you've told me why they've won. You've weighed off for me the 2 arguments and explained why they've won. And I think flagging and being very specific about who you're arguing against is a really good way to make sure that judges don't think you haven't engaged with a team or you've skipped one. I don't think it happened in this debate, but I just think in general it's a good strategy. Because WHIP is a great position that people don't like and can be very useful, but it's super important that you're very explicit about what's happening and why you've won, and who you're targeting at various points in the speech. So I think that was something to work on. But I think both your analysis was very good, and I think your arguments were very good. Now, calling in closing opposition. I think you guys have a slight problem of overlap with your opening opposition. I thought a lot of your analysis was kind of rephrasing of their stuff. So for example, that you're like, it's more important to talk about negative than positive because these are issues people need to talk about. That has been said by the leader of opposition. I think you talking about investment and getting good images of it also seems to have been an opening opposition. I think you talk about, where is it? I think you talk about people thinking you're more honest and believable. I think that is just credibility said in a different way. And then I think the analysis that is new, which is an impact that I think extends on the opening opposition, but is a separate impact, which is like that when you hide away things, you make it worse and make the individuals in the country poorer. But I don't think you explain why that's true. I think you just say it. And I think there probably are ways to claim that's true, and I think it is a unique extension on the debate. But I don't think you guys go the extent to analysis that takes it. So that at this point, it means like I don't think you have a very strong substantive case in the debate, because I think a lot of it is repetition. And then the other way to win it'd be like an analysis extension, but I don't think your analysis takes it far enough there. I think you've rephrased things rather than extended on them to the degree that I'm like, I don't think there's enough substantive added to the debate. The third way to win at this point would be a responsive case, and I just don't think you guys spend enough time attacking the responsiveness. So as it stands, taking on your opening opposition, it's really hard to credit you guys at any position above them, because I think you're too reliant on them, and it doesn't seem to extend. And then comparing you against opening government, I think you take some attacks on them at different points. But again, one of the problems is one of the main attacks that comes out in whip is a knife to your opening opposition. That you're like, oh no, celebrities don't have influence over people, they aren't going to affect these people, so they won't have an effect on the investment in the way they say. Again, because your opening opposition has said it will, you can't say that. But then I don't think you engage in any of their material about like internally within the country and why that's likely to change. And then I just don't think you engage particularly with the back half. Like I think there's I don't think there's enough direct engagement with them. I don't think you guys take on their conception of why people are likely to engage with celebrities. I think you just say they don't. And I think you don't talk about, like, when they talk about why people are likely to build in investors, I don't think you spend enough time, but likely to listen to celebrities, and this may reduce racism. I think there are ways to attack that argument, but I don't think you spend the time doing it. So it becomes like hard to place you in the debate, because you neither seem to have an analysis or a new impact extension, nor do you seem to have sufficient responsiveness to have a responsiveness case. So that's how you ended up in the position you were. Going into individual feedback, I think for member of opposition, sorry, I was just reading in the chat. For member of opposition, I think you could do with, again, like a little more structure to your speech. I think it's somewhat like wanders around the place. So you're like, oh, identifying the problem we actually face and show it in reality. So you set it up as like, oh, this is why negative is more important than positive. I think you should have been like, oh, like if you think your speech might sufficiently overlap with your top half, this is where you need to be like thinking with strategy. So I think setting up like why negative is more important is actually a new framing from opening opposition, who are like, we should talk about both equally. I think that's a new way to do it, being like, even if proper, like, and I think the way to do that is to be like, we will take a higher burden than our opening opposition and say, even if we can't have a perfect trade-off, we're willing to take having more negative portrayals, because we think that's more important than to have equal amount of portrayals of both. I think that would have been a way to specifically set yourselves apart, and I think you sort of do it, but I think you implicitly do it, but being very specific on why you're separate. But I do think you did have a problem of just having new impacts. I don't know if that was like you felt it had been said before, maybe you didn't think they'd said it sufficiently, but if you think they'd said it before, I think then the way to handle that is to change strategy, either by making your speech very responsive, so that is you'd least particularly place above, you're attempting to place above the other side. In a debate like this where your OG had come third, your opening opposition had lost them, you could have taken over them, because would have been like, the end comparison would have been like, oh, I think they made some points, but I think CO put themselves in the debate and were much more explicit on why it is that their side has particular harms. The other thing to be said about thinking about responsiveness is it often shows you what's missing in the debate. So I think trading off why celebrities are in a position to talk about negative in a way that other communities aren't is a really, really important, really good extension, and that was missing in the debate. And I think if you thought of responsiveness, you would have seen that argumentation missing, and it's what CG did that was so effective. So I think you do have a problem. I think the other strategy, if you're like, so what is it? So if you think that, so either you think its overlap's complete, that's how I change my strategy. I would start thinking of responsiveness, firstly because that can be your substantive arguments, but also because thinking of responsiveness tends to let you see what's missing in the debate. If you felt like your opening half had not explained sufficiently the points you were going to say, so you felt you're extending. The way to do that is to explain to the judges why it is you're extending. So that is, I think you were like, I think how I do it would be like, opening opposition said that like getting more awareness brings more help in. I don't think they've explained to you with mechanistic links why that is likely to happen. We are going to specifically bring you the analysis that proves that to be true and thereby makes it relevant to the debate. So that would be very explicitly explaining why your analysis extension is a separate extension, and I think that could have worked well for you. Because I do think at some points you're nearly analysing it further, but I think if you had recognized, like been more explicit about the fact that you were going to do analysis extension, it also would have forced you to think about more explicitly how you're adding new material, and then I think it would have helped you get to those links that would have made it a new analysis extension. These are just, I've been in your position before where I felt I've had like my opening up team say everything I plan to say, and those are just my ways of handling it, and I think that they've worked very well. So I think those are the two strategies, depending on which approach you want to take. That being said, like taking aside that it was repetitive, I think your points were well made, but again, slightly unfocused. I think you went from like identifying the problem to not feeling harms for the sympathy, you need to show the reality. And then I think you go straight into talking about investors, and then you go back to like how people should improve themselves and letting spread news about the problems. It's like, it's a little all over the place. I think some more structure to your speech would have really helped. I think the way to do that is and this is how I always do debates, so I would recommend it. I give a title to my point, which is, what am I trying to prove is true? Analysis, that is, what needs to be true for this to happen? Impacts, which I think was partially missing in your speech. Like I think because you're mixing the analysis and the impacts as a separate point. So proving what needs to be true, then explaining why should we care about this, which is impacting. And then the last thing is weighing off, which is why, even if prop has some benefits, it's more important to do it on their side, or why it is that you've taken it over your top half by explaining the analysis more. Because I think you had a lot of really good ideas, but I think they just kept getting mixed up together. Like I thought the improving themselves and like why that leads to production was really good. But then you go back to being like, because we're spreading the news, that has achieved it. You talk about half-facing challenges and people still being engaged with it, and then you loop back into people becoming poor, which is an impact. You see it? So I can't see if you're nodding or shaking your head, but basically you kept going between analysis and impact. So you went from like spreading news of their problems to talking about poor to talking about health, but then going back to analysis of countries needing help with like Gaza and the Sudan, which is both analysis and impact. So it's like, I really think your speech needed more structure, but also to just a bit more tactics about watching like what's already happened in the debate, how can we add from this, how do we make sure we're distinct from this from our opening. The whip, I think you also could do with more like the last whip. I think you firstly had the problem with slight knifing. Secondly, though not to the same degree, had some problems with slightly new material. But biggest one is I think you really needed more structure to being like, who are you addressing? Why is it that you're analyzing them in this way? So I think again going like, here's what the closing government said. Here's what we said, why we won. Here's what the opening government said. Here's what we said, why we won. And then so you're about to leave. The last thing to say is then like bench weighing. I think that really would have helped both. I really think that would have just helped push your speech more, and I think it would have made your team seem more responsive. I appreciate it. So that was fast, but she had to go. So there's not much point in telling the rest of you. Does anyone have any questions, or would you like any other more individual feedback?